Good morning. Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass, was a pogrom against Jews carried out by government-led forces, along with participation from Hitler Youth, German civilians throughout Germany and Austria on the 9th and 10th of November 1938. The German authorities looked on without intervening. The pretext for the attacks was the assassination of the German diplomat Ernst von Roth by Herschel Greenspan, a 17-year-old German-born Polish Jew living in Paris. All of this happened to a Jewish German population that, for the most part, would not believe the German people would do such things. One of the most striking facts regarding Kristallnacht was that despite the global reporting of what happened, no outrage was expressed by any country. Israel is currently in the process of defending herself against what was the worst attack on Jews since the Holocaust, by an enemy that perpetrated heinous crimes against humanity and kidnapped over 200 hostages, including infants, women, and many other non-combatants. Yet, when you listen to the news reports or read articles regarding the current state of affairs, the Jewish victims are now often portrayed as the perpetrators, bombing schools and withholding food, water, and medicine from Palestinians. And in fact, the Jews have brought this upon themselves through years of oppression of the Palestinian population. It is seldom mentioned that a ceasefire, along with food, fuel, and medicine, have been offered in exchange for the hostages. It is mentioned even less often that the Hamas leaders have taken credit for October 7th and have vowed to commit similar acts in the future. And Hamas continues to fire rockets indiscriminately at Israeli population centers and then hides behind their own people as human shields. Yet there are few, if any, news articles shouting about Hamas war crimes. Despite this skewed reporting, Israel and the IDF continue to do what needs to be done, regardless of the obstacles or opinions. As Golda Meir stated, we have always said that in our war with the Arabs, we had a secret weapon, no alternative. The roots of anti-Semitism extend back throughout the centuries. There is evidence all around the world that it is spreading at levels not seen since the days of the Holocaust. Today's guest speaker is an esteemed researcher who studies the spread of anti-Semitism and will discuss some of the newest ways these messages of hate are gaining a rapidly growing audience across the globe. But first, let's start with prayer. Let us now pray in support of the IDF, as we are led by Rabbi David Wise of Congregation Eitz Chaim at Holland Hills Bayside. Rabbi Wise?
I'll recite the prayer first in Hebrew and then in English. Mishiberach Avotenu Abraham Yitzchak v'Yaakov Sarah Rivka Rachel v'Leah ויברך את חיילי צבא ההגנה לישראל ואנשי כוחות הביטחון העומדים על משמר ארצנו וערי אלוהינו מגבול הלבנון ועד מדבר מצרים ומן הים הגדול עד לבוא הערבה ובכל מקום שהם ביבשה באוויר ובים ייתן אדוני את אויבינו הקמים עלינו ניגפים לפניהם. הקדוש ברוך הוא ישמור ויציל את חיילינו מכל צרה וצוקה ומכל נגע ומחלה וישלח ברכה והצלחה בכל מעשה ידיהם. ידבר שונאינו תחתיהם, ויעטרם בכתר ישועה ובעטרת ניצחון. ויקוים בהם הכתוב, כי אדוני אלוהיכם ההולך עמכם להילחם לכם עם אויביכם, להושיע אתכם, ונאמר אמן.
Amen.
May God, who blessed our ancestors Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, bless the members of Israel's defense forces and its security services, who stand guard over our land and the cities of our God, from the Lebanese border to the Egyptian desert, from the Mediterranean Sea to the approach of the Arava, and wherever else they are, on land, in air, and at sea. May God make the enemies who rise against us be struck down before them. May the Holy Blessed One protect and deliver them from all trouble and distress, affliction and illness, and send blessing and success to all the work of their hands. May God subdue our enemies under them and crown them with deliverance and victory. And may there be fulfilled in them the verse, it is Adonai your God who goes with you to fight for you against your enemies to deliver you. And let's all say, Amen.
Amen.
Now, we'd like to call on Rabbi Green to lead us in a prayer for the hostages.
Hold on 1 second. Okay. Now I need to see Rabbi Green. There he is. Elohei Yisrael, God of Israel, our rock and our redeemer, God of mercy, of compassion. We pray, we plead that you return those precious and beloved people, the captured and the missing, who have cruelly and heartlessly been torn away from their homes and carried off to our enemy's territory. We're terrified, contemplating their fate, and horrified at the thought of what the missing and the captured are suffering right now. They lay beyond our reach and our capacity to save them, and so we plead before you. Father of mercy, be at their side, support them, protect them, and quickly bring them back to the embrace of their families and all who love them, as you have declared. Thus says the Lord, behold, I'll restore the captives of Jacob's tents and have mercy on their dwelling places. We beseech you, Adonai, quickly fulfill your word. Here I am with you. I'll watch over you wherever you go and will bring you back to this land. Indeed, I will not leave you until I have done what I have said to you. And the sons will return to their borders. Amen. And let it be God's will. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Rabbi Green. It is now my pleasure and honor to introduce our speaker, Professor Sabine von Mering. Professor Sabine von Mering is from Brandeis University, where among her areas of research is the study of anti-Semitism. Dr. von Mering was born in Oldenburg, Germany, and grew up on Langeoog, Germany, a small island near the seaport of Bremerhaven. She majored in English and German studies at the University of Köln in Cologne. She did graduate work at the University of Göttingen and at Reed College in Portland, Oregon, and completed a PhD in German studies at the University of California, Davis. Dr. von Mering is professor of German and Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies and director of the Center for German and European Studies at Brandeis University. She's also a member of the program faculty in Environmental Studies at Brandeis University. Dr. von Mering's research focuses on several areas that are of relevance to today's remembrance of Kristallnacht. They include the study of anti-Semitism on social media and German-Jewish dialogue. Her co-edited volumes include Anti-Semitism on Social Media and Right-Wing Radicalism Today, Perspectives from Europe and the US. She's also currently teaching a new undergraduate course on anti-Semitism on social media. Dr. von Mering will speak to us this morning about how social media fuels anti-Semitism. Dr. von Mering will answer some questions at the end of her presentation, so please submit your questions through the chat function addressed to Rabbi Gordon Yaffe. Please join me in welcoming Dr. von Mering.
Thank you very much, and good morning to all. I'm speaking to you from California, so I'm 3 hours behind you. And I just wanted to start by saying I understand these are very difficult times, and I appreciate you taking the time to be here together. It's always good to be together in difficult times. I'm going to share my screen. And although George already mentioned the reason why we're meeting, I thought it would be appropriate that I start out by speaking for a bit about the commemoration, since it is 85 years since the actual Kristallnacht pogrom in Germany. And you may not know this, but the word Kristallnacht is actually something we're taught not to use in Germany. So I'm always a little uncomfortable using it, but I know that in Jewish circles in America, it is the common word for these atrocities. But in Germany, we are told that the word is actually a Nazi word and that we should instead use pogrom night or a Reichspogrom night. So young Germans also respond, like when we have some students at Brandeis who come from Germany, they're like, what, why are you using Nazi words? So I work, as you can see here, for the Center for German and European Studies at Brandeis, and we will be hosting a woman, Doris Edwards, who actually survived as a child, and she was at the Kristallnacht pogrom in Germany as a 9-year-old. So she's going to be in person at Brandeis next week. And we also have a historian who will join us to talk about the anti-Semitism of Adolf Hitler on the interaction of malicious intentions and unplanned circumstances later on. So I'm mentioning these two events next week because you can actually join them. We are hosting these in hybrid format, and I'll be happy to share the information how to join. So we're also currently hosting on campus an exhibit that was provided for us by the German government with their program called Germany on Campus. They each year do this on different themes related to Germany. And this year, the 85th anniversary of the pogrom night prompted them to produce a powerful exhibition with images and text derived mainly from holdings of the Wiener Library in London, with original eyewitness testimony from 1938. So you have here Herschel Greenspan, who was just mentioned, so I don't have to explain the background as you all just heard it, but it's important that this event of the 1938 also prompted the Kindertransport initiative, which saved 15,000 Jewish children from Germany and Austria. I also decided to include this because there are a couple of pictures specifically from Oldenburg, and it's very important to me to, grapple with the fact that it was in my very birthplace where Jewish men were rounded up and arrested and paraded in a long march through the city center on November 9, 1938. And you can see that here because it was also always in many of the cities in Germany combined with a lot of attention from the crowds. And so the idea that non-Jewish Germans, would say after the war that they didn't know what was going on was, of course, ludicrous and is nicely revealed in these photographs that we have. This is the interior of the Munich synagogue after Kristallnacht. Of course, there were many places like that. Over 1,200 synagogues were desecrated, looted, and burned. 7,500 Jewish businesses were wrecked and looted. Thousands of homes, people literally, they stormed into Jewish homes. And many Jewish victims actually remember this mainly for the feathers, because pillows would be destroyed and thrown out the window. And so there were a lot of feathers in the air and on the ground. Many were attacked, abused, and beaten, and at least 90 people were killed, but we don't know the actual number of victims. 25,000 men were arrested and deported and detained in nearby concentration camps, so-called concentration camps that were built then, Buchenwald, Dachau, and Sachsenhausen being the main destinations, and hundreds of them died from the brutal treatment in these camps.
Включи телевизор. Да, мне.
Oh, I think someone just need to mute. So, you know, here you have another case of Jewish property burned in Moosbach. That was also something that was done, although in many cases the Jewish property was, of course, actually taken and used by non-Jews, and they enriched themselves that way. Many more, this Gütersloh here on the bottom. Jews were also charged 1 billion Deutschmarks after the events for the cleanup that needed to happen. Here is a scene of onlookers at the synagogue in Hof in Bavaria, where people are taking the interior fittings away. So I just think it's important for my students to understand this history, and so I was very glad that the embassy allowed us to bring this exhibit to campus, and yeah, we're keeping it up for a number of weeks. Of course, you know, this is may well be personal history to some of you. I don't know how many of you have German or Austrian or European roots, but there may well be some of you who have direct connections to. This is another image from Oldenburg where the Jewish men are marched to prison, and you know, these were well-respected members of the city community who were treated abominably by their fellow citizens. And one of the humiliating forms of treatment that was implemented right away was this idea of roll call, that people had to stand often for hours and hours and hours and in the camps. So I thought that we should take a brief moment of silence, because many Jews in Germany really considered this the official beginning of the atrocities that led to the Holocaust. Thank you. And as we look back on this 85 years later, of course, we are learning and teaching more about this history. More and more research is conducted. And one of the important lessons of the past decades has been, of course, unearthing the stories of non-Jewish victims also. The Nazis murdered 6 million Jews in the camps, which was the largest group that was targeted. And of course, it wasn't just, they combined murder with plundering and theft and destruction of Jewish culture and history. But there were also 5 million non-Jewish victims that were targeted, including gays, priests, Sinti and Roma, people with mental and physical disabilities, communists, trade unionists, Jehovah's Witnesses, anarchists, Poles and other Slavic people, and resistance fighters. And so that is something that, you know, has sort of been studied more in depth in recent years. And of course, that also is in context of the fact that the Holocaust took place within World War II, which meant that, for example, over 38 million civilians were killed across Europe and the world. So we are looking at a devastating history. But today, and for the context of the commemoration of 1938, we're focusing on specifically on anti-Semitism, and what I would like to talk about in the next half hour or so is the specific issue of anti-Semitism on social media. This comes, as George mentioned, for me, as a result of the publication of this book, which I published together with Monika Hübscher, who is a graduate student at the University of Haifa. The Germans are funding 20 centers for German and European studies in the world, and Haifa and Brandeis have both have one of these centers. That's how I was invited to Haifa and met Monika, and we found common interests, and this led to this book. Monika is currently in Essen as a researcher, and we brought many people together for this volume, and they have written a number of chapters. So the first one that we wrote ourselves, I don't know, for some reason it's not visible to me now, but probably because oops, no, that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to hide my rotating controls. Okay, yes, so we wrote the first chapter together, a snapshot of anti-Semitism on social media in 2021, and I will be focusing my talk mostly on that, which talks about the technology and the business model. But there's also other chapters, like, one on the QAnon movement, for example, and the history of anti-Semitic tropes in today's anti-Semitism. There's one that Monika co-wrote on the anti-Semitism in the AfD, which is the Alternative for Germany, the new right-wing party in Germany. There's one about left-wing anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. There's one about troll attacks, which is another form of anti-Semitism that we find on YouTube. There's one on neo-Nazi networks and how they use anti-Semitism. We also have one expert who looks specifically at Islamist clerics and their anti-Semitic rhetoric in Urdu on YouTube. We have a study into conspiracies on YouTube and Telegram by two very young researchers that look at one particular person's trajectory, sort of from how he became more anti-Semitic. We're looking at the construction of memes and how especially the so-called happy merchant meme is used on social media and promoted. The one chapter deals with TikTok, which is the fastest growing social media platform. We have one chapter that looks specifically at how anti-Semitic content and hate speech on social media impacts young Jewish social media users, which is something I'm sure you are hearing from young people in your families. And then there's one chapter that looks at the role of artificial intelligence on, trying to curtail anti-Semitism on social media, and what needs to happen is of course defining it for the AI. Then so the question in this last half is about how to deal with this, and reporting, not reporting anti-Semitism on social media, and the role of civil society by two members of the World Jewish Congress. And finally, Michael Bossetta gives sort of a broader look on this as one of, how does anti-Semitism on social media fit into the broader picture? Because, of course, we have to understand that hate is spread on social media, and it doesn't distinguish anti-Semitism. So in other words, anti-Semitism is one form of hate that is spread on social media, and it is a very powerful form of hate. But of course, there are sexism, for example, is a huge problem in social media, and so is racism and Islamophobia and other forms of hate. So that's an important context to consider. So for those of you, I don't know how active you all are on social media. So I just put the biggest social media platforms up here for us to just sort of take in the relative novelty of this phenomenon, right? The oldest one is Facebook from 2004, which means 19 years. That's not a lot of time, and yet Facebook is now used by 3 billion people worldwide. That's billion with a B, right? So that is an enormous number of people who are connecting and sharing and posting, and we have to consider what that means. How do we actually handle this as modern democratic societies? And Facebook is only the first one. We can see here that in 2005, YouTube arrived, which now has 2.4 billion users. Instagram, which of course belongs to the same company, Meta, as Facebook, has 2 billion users today. It arrived in 2010. Before that, Twitter, or now called X, arrived in 2006, which is smaller. It has 666 million users today. The newest kid on the block is TikTok, launched by a Chinese company in 2016, but it is, as you can see, the fastest growing, and already now has 1.2 billion users, many of them under 18. We tend to differentiate social media companies from messenger apps. So some of you may be using WhatsApp, probably not Telegram, but I don't know, maybe you use Telegram. But both of these are starting out, and WhatsApp, of course, also belongs to Meta, the same company as Facebook. And WhatsApp starts out as a simple one-directional messaging app that isn't, structured in the same way as social media, but it is changing. Both WhatsApp and Telegram are changing to have more features that are similar to social media, and we'll talk about that next. So what does it mean? What is social media? According to the Wikipedia definition, social media means interactive technologies that facilitate the creation and sharing of information, ideas, interests, and other forms of expression through virtual communities and networks. That all sounds beautiful. It sounds very harmless. It sounds like a wonderful opportunity for us. It's Web 2.0, which means that it's not one way, it's two-way. We interact with each other. Most importantly, it's user-generated content, right? So people are adding posts, comments, photos, videos, other data, and interacting with them online. Users generates profiles on these apps. Most people are actually using social media only on their smartphones and not on their computers, but both, of course, is done. And the social media organization, the platform company, maintains and designs these sites. And so the idea behind it is social media helps the development of online social networks by connecting a user's profile with those of other individuals or groups. Again, this sounds like a beautiful commons of people. What it doesn't say is that social media are, of course, for-profit companies. So in other words, all this material that users post on social media is how the companies make money and derive a profit. So when we talk about anti-Semitism on social media, we have to always keep that in mind. This is anti-Semitism for profit in a very weird way. And we'll talk about that in a moment again. What's different about anti-Semitism on social media as opposed to in the real world, offline, is that you can reach millions or possibly billions with a mouse click, right? That was not possible before. It is for profit, and it comes in many different forms: videos, images, GIFs, posts, comments, likes, dislikes. And it is promoted by counterspeech. We'll talk about that in a moment. And it also includes coded forms that remain undetected by content managers and artificial intelligence. So all these things make anti-Semitism on social media a lot more potent, a lot more dangerous, a lot more difficult to stop. So why is this so difficult, so different? It's the algorithm. So in other words, an algorithm is actually just a code, a set of code, a set of instructions. If this, then this, right? The computer gives, makes instructions. I'm not a computer scientist, but basically it just says, like, if the person clicks this, then this should happen and this should happen. And so what the social media company algorithms do is they take everything you give them in terms of your engagement and use it to generate what you are going to see. But they also use it, of course, to learn about you, to learn your likes and dislikes, to learn what you, who you connect with, when you do so, how long you click on an image or a video. If you don't click something, that's also information. Basically, any time you spend on any social media, you have to sort of think of it as a camera. If you come into a store, like a surveillance camera, right? But this camera isn't only seeing you and watching you as you walk through the store. This camera is also collecting data from you and using that data to generate income. And so every move you make, anything you touch, anything you look at, any person you interact with is absorbed by the algorithm and is used to give you more, to decide what else you are going to see. So what we find is that social media technology and the business model promotes hyper-partisanship. Yeah, what the people who have written the code have found, that the more divisive, the more engagement, the more negative, the more engagement. And because engagement generates dopamine effects and it also generates profit, it's sort of a win-win situation for them. The problem for us is that the more engagement and the more polarization it destroys our communities, right? So that is why hateful content is particularly lucrative for social media companies. The more outrageous, the better. And that, of course, creates the so-called echo chambers that we are aware of nowadays, where people are really only seeing what they want to see. They only hear what they want to hear. They are only surrounded by people who think exactly like them, because that's, that's the most, that's how they get the most engagement. And that produces the most profit. So one of the founders, not founders of social media, one of the computer brains, you could say, behind social media is Yaron Lanier. And he's a fascinating character, a son of Holocaust survivors, who is a computer scientist. He's also musical instrument collector and something of a philosopher. And he wrote this very powerful little book, which I would highly recommend you buy for all your young people in your lives. It's called 10 Arguments for Deleting Social Media Accounts Right Now. And in this book, which is very tiny and very quick read, he develops a concept he calls bummer. He calls social media bummer machines, behavior of users modified and made into empires for rent. That's the bummer. And the reason he talks about behavior modification is that he sees how the social media platforms are able to basically make people do things they don't actually really want to do, right? And then it generates profit. And so it's and he also talks beautifully about the fact that we become our worst possible self on social media, and which is one of the reasons why he's strongly recommending that people get off social media. Because he says that there's no room for nuance. There's no room for discussing something with someone who disagrees with you, right? And I'm sure you've all, if you are on social media, you've all had this experience that there's just this, this sort of fanfare in one direction or another, and you either have to go strongly in that side or strongly in that side, and there's no room for any kind of careful consideration, none, right? It's very different from being in a room with people and actually talking over things and figuring out what's really going on. I found this, my students just read this text for my class, and several of them mentioned to me that it was eye-opening to them, because they self-declare being completely addicted to social media, literally addicted, that's the word they use. And they had no idea that this was the purpose, right? That the social media company makes the most money the longer time we spend there. And so their interest is to keep us there. How do they keep us there? By getting us worked up about something so that we can't stop. And then we just keep scrolling and we keep, and so they felt very manipulated, and it doesn't mean that they've been able to stop the addiction. We're only starting to educate, right? But it is a very important first step. Another book that I can recommend is Max Fischer's The Chaos Machine, the inside story of how social media rewired our minds and our world. Max Fischer talks specifically about the gamer community. And many of my students are telling me that that is also where a lot of anti-Semitism is experienced, that there's a lot of, negativity coming through this a whole other world, of course, of interaction that's not social media directly. But he looks at how gamers and YouTube sort of led to rabbit holes of hate. And of course, this what our chapter, Monica and my chapter in particular, also looked at is that it actually leads to offline violence. I mean, that is particularly disturbing today. There was a whistleblower at Facebook called Frances Haugen. You may have seen her in the news in 2021. And she said, she was part of Facebook, and she said Facebook realized that if they change the algorithm to be safer, people will spend less time on the site, they will click on less ads, they will make less money. So that is one problem. She also said, collectively, the documents told the story of a company fully aware that its harms sometimes exceeded even critics' worst assessments. At times, the reports warned explicitly of dangers that later became deadly, like a spike in hate speech or in vaccine misinformation, with plenty of notice for the company to have acted, and had it not refused to do so, possibly saved lives. So now, when we look at social media usage in the United States, internet traffic jumped, of course, during the pandemic because we were all stuck in our homes. And Facebook, for example, reported a 70% increase in usage in some countries. Twitter, now X, grew 23%. YouTube's share jumped. Overall internet usage rose 40%. Right? So here it says YouTube's traffic nearly tripled. So the number of people and the time we spend on these platforms has hugely increased thanks to our time stuck in our homes. The other problem is that 62% of Americans now say they get their news from Facebook, right? And those are, not the young people, because the young people have left Facebook, so they actually get their news from TikTok. Mark Zuckerberg, of course, CEO of Meta, says we're a technology company, not a media company. And that's a problem, because if the company is a technology company, they don't have to answer to the same kinds of safeguards and guardrails that we expect from media companies. I don't know if any of you saw the movie She Said about the Harvey Weinstein scandal, but it was made by a very good German director. But in that movie, what I found particularly helpful was how they showed how meticulous journalists, serious journalists, have to be when they have to, when they have to fact check. Right? The whole idea of fact-checking is out the window with social media. There is no one fact-checking. Everyone can post whatever they want, and it is completely unfact-checked. Today, for example, in the situation we're in Israel and Gaza, if I look at the German broadcast news, which I often look at, they have a disclaimer under every report that says these are news that are relying on the two warring parties for information, because people cannot report from these areas, which is problematic, right? Because they have an interest in presenting things a certain way. And so as journalists, serious journalists have to give such a disclaimer. Social media, no. Now, I said my students admit that they're addicted to social media. This is not unique to Brandeis. As you can see here, about 1 in 5 teens visit or use YouTube almost constantly, right? They're literally on these, they have their phone on them all the time, even in class. They're constantly looking at this. Here you see the usage. Oops, my text disappeared, but you can see Facebook is not that popular among young people. YouTube is. TikTok has jumped. There is, they are spending a lot of time on these platforms. 54% of teens say it would be hard to give up social media. Teens can even show that it's addictive. Nearly all teens in 2022 have access to a smartphone. That's 95% of teens. So that's basically all the teens. Nearly half of teens now say they use the internet almost constantly. Black Hispanic teens more likely than white teens to say they are online almost constantly. This is another piece. These numbers are all from a Pew Research Center study from May 2022. So this is really important information, because if we agree that social media companies are profiting from negative engagement and from using, fact-checked material, then it's a problem if young people are getting their news from that. The majority of teens use YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat. They're not necessarily on Facebook, although my generation typically is more on Facebook. And college students spend on average between 2 and 4 hours a day on social media. And I think that is an average, which means many spend more than 4 hours a day. And of course, in times of crisis like now, it is much more. There are studies that have shown that social media play a vital role in all sorts of radicalizations and generate support for a significant percentage of terrorist acts. This is Julia Ebner, who has written a book that I don't think is available in English yet. But if it were, it would be called something like Radicalization Machines: How Extremists Are Using the New Technologies and How They Are Manipulating Us. And this is important if we remember, anyone can have a social media account. What that means is that Hamas is very present on social media. They used social media while they were perpetrating their atrocities, right? And they get treated like a customer. I mean, if you I know Monica was doing some research on what they were filming and how they were posting it, and she would have, ads from Versace in between murderous attacks on the kibbutz, and ads for trips to Rome, and so this is how this works, right? They are not, the social media companies are not refraining from the business model for these matters. In August 21, there was a study conducted that showed that 5 major social media companies, including Facebook and Twitter, took no action to remove 84% of anti-Semitic posts. And by early 2022, this is from the Chaos Machine again, one study found more than 1 in 9 state lawmakers nationwide belonged to at least one far-right Facebook group in the United States. We have celebrities with millions of followers that contribute to the spread of hate, and that includes spreading anti-Semitism. We had the very famous case last year with Kanye West, which went through the press and got a lot of attention, but that's of course only one of them. And there was a lot of positive engagement with his attitude. And the problem is that this is people who know what they're doing. But there's a lot of people who unwittingly promote anti-Semitism on social media and other forms of hate. So in the chapter that I mentioned about TikTok, which is the fastest growing platform used mainly by children and young adults, they compared anti-Semitic postings just from one year to the next and saw a dramatic increase. And that involved anti-Semitic comments, but even, people using anti-Semitic usernames was popular on these platforms. And often the people that are promoting or sharing or liking comments, they don't even necessarily understand why it is anti-Semitic. I'll give you one example, and I apologize, this is upsetting, but here's one example of a TikTok meme, where someone is basically trying to make a joke. Oops, it says my internet connection is unstable. Hope that stops. Trying to make a joke about deportation of Jews, and people like and share this, and there's no way for the platform to recognize it as anti-Semitic, because it doesn't say explicitly something against Jews. You have to understand the context and the image in order to understand that it's anti-Semitic. UNESCO found that almost 20% of the content on TikTok related to the Holocaust denies or distorts the truth. So what can be done about this? What are counter strategies to anti-Semitism on social media? Well, regulation is an obvious step, right? The platforms that are hosting everything for profit need to be held accountable. It's not a public space. People sometimes think of it as a public space. It's not. It's a for-profit company. It's like being in a store. So this is happening in someone's store, and the store owners need to be held accountable because they are getting very rich off of this. We need education. That includes, of course, that we need the history of anti-Semitism and the Holocaust to be taught at all levels. But we also need social media literacy for our young people so that they really understand how social media works and why it's dangerous to engage on social media, that they need to be very knowledgeable of the algorithmic nature of things. The most important lesson, and I want to make clear that everyone here understands this, is bystander intervention has to be different in an algorithmic context. Why? We tell people in normal life, offline, if you see something, say something, right? If someone is being attacked next to you for a racist or an anti-Semitic reason, you step up and you intervene. If you intervene in an algorithmic context, you are actually helping the initial hateful content to receive more attention. So the first thing that's important for people to learn is to not use the algorithm, to not allow the algorithm to use your engagement to amplify the hateful content. So counter speech, posting something negative under an anti-Semitic content, disliking it, sharing it, and saying, "Isn't this outrageous?" is actually the opposite of what we need to do. One way to deal with that is to use screenshots, because when you screenshot something and then post it on your own page, that the algorithm cannot follow that. But what's most important in terms of a takeaway here is do not engage with hateful comments. We need urgently more expertise, and that requires multidisciplinary expertise. People who write code are not anti-Semitism scholars. anti-Semitism scholars don't learn anything about computer algorithms. That's a problem. These things need to go together, and every school, every university needs to teach these things together. And when it comes to artificial intelligence, what we have found is that artificial intelligence is, of course, not at all intelligent, right? It's in a way, it's a very bad name for it, because it's just code. And so it cannot understand the nuances of hate. It cannot understand whether something may be Holocaust education as opposed to Holocaust denial. Artificial intelligence doesn't know how to distinguish the two. So all forms of anti-Semitism need to become detectable, and that will require a lot of effort on the part of those who code. And we need content management on these platforms that actually understands anti-Semitism and the history of the Holocaust and so on. Right now, the platforms are spending a fraction of their profit on content management, taking down the hateful stuff. They need to spend much more on that. So for scholars, that means we need more expertise. We need familiarity with the tools, because you cannot study anti-Semitism on social media, because social media are private companies and they won't let you use their data. Twitter was actually really good compared to all the others of allowing scholars access to data, and Elon Musk took over and stopped that and allowed all the haters back on the platform and so on. And Facebook was never particularly interested in allowing scholars to actually have access to the data. This costs money. If you use tools to study this, it requires resources. We need very interdisciplinary work, and we need to understand that this problem that we're seeing right now is expanding at a rate that was never possible before, right? The volume, the speed, the evolution, the global reach, the languages, the many, many languages in which hateful content gets shared is incomprehensible. And yes, we have to have access to the data in order to study them. So we need resources, we need the tools, we need the expertise. What are other ways we can deal with this problem? You all are hopefully now becoming more familiar with this as a problem, and you can help advocate that hate gets regulated on social media. You can help holding the platforms accountable, demand that they put more resources into AI and content management so that hateful content cannot be seen as easily. And yes, we need to educate about hatred. We need to teach empathy and not counter speech, because counter speech just amplifies the polarization, right? And ultimately, of course, we want to live together in a peaceful world. So we actually need to build allyship with others who are being targeted in order to become stronger voices in this. And yes, fund and promote research will help. We also need to be creative. I'm often asked, but isn't there also something good about social media? And of course, people are using it for good. But there is, and I'll show an example in a moment. There is a lot the social media platforms could do, right? So Frances Haugen had a very simple answer. When asked what would most effectively reform both the platforms and the companies overseeing them, she said, they can turn off the algorithm. And she said liability protections should also be overhauled. so that they become legally responsible for the consequences of anything their systems promote. They could get rid of the engagement-based ranking. Platforms could roll back to the 2000s when they simply displayed your friends' posts by the newest to the oldest, because most people don't understand that that's not how it works. Facebook is not like the mail, right? You don't actually see everything that the people post who you are friends with. Instead, you're seeing attention maximizing content produced mainly by AI at this point. So that has led to social media having a major role in the January 6th events, and were interestingly not mentioned in the final report. But there are, as I said, positive examples, of course. There are people, for example, Lily Ebert and Dov Foreman, Holocaust survivor and her grandson, who have managed to have a following on TikTok with content that educates about the Holocaust, right? And many people are learning through Lily's storytelling and her eyewitness sharing, and you know, that is of course also something that creates positive engagement and educational engagement. So although of course there's hateful commenting there as well. I think I'll send you the resources in the mail, but I thank you very much for listening to my endless talk. I hope I didn't go over time. And thank you so much for having me.
Professor Von Merrick, thank you so much. That was, among other things, chilling. Your content, your information. I think there was a great number of ideas and concepts that most people were completely unfamiliar with and unaware of. And it's quite disturbing when you present it like this, and it rings true. But we have a number of questions. Rabbi Yafi, would you like to
mute? Okay, and I'm gonna. Here I am. Okay. Thank you so much. Can I call you Sabina?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Yes. Okay. I'm going to take the privilege of asking. This is my question first, and then we have a number of questions in the chat. But I'd like to know, as a college professor, the current level of anti-Semitic acts on college campuses and the difficulty that we have in young, intelligent people being so much part of the social media. How effective do you think you can be in helping our college students to understand the importance of differentiating from news as understood from social media and news based on truth and facts? What's your role, and also what do you think can be our role? But you're in the thick of it, and we're all concerned about it.
Yes.
And I think it needs to start in high school and in elementary school. But you've got the college kids. What can you do about it?
Yes. Yes, I agree. It's an incredibly difficult time, and unfortunately, most of my colleagues are also not really aware of this. Many of my colleagues are not on social media because they don't like it, and they don't really, they see the polarization, and so they stay away from it. Which unfortunately means that the kids are sort of left alone there, and many people don't actually understand why this is happening. There's a disconnect between the generations, right? So it is eye-opening to me as a college professor. I teach, but I mostly learn from my students on a daily basis because they bring to me their concerns and their, their generation's questions, and that usually challenges me all the time. In my current class on anti-Semitism on social media, we had about a month before the horrific terrorist attack on October 7th to build some kind of trust among each other, and that really helped, so to say, we need to be able to talk to each other no matter how we feel, no matter what we think. We need to have a space in which we can process our thinking, and I am just beyond amazed at my students at how they're handling this. They're incredibly kind. Brandeis students are special, maybe. But I have actually been able to create a space in which we can disagree with each other respectfully and kindly, if that makes sense. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen anywhere anymore. Of course, people are, right now we're in statement time, and so everyone is sort of pushed to bring out a statement of sorts, and these statements kind of become a battle of themselves on social media. There's like a statement war going on social media where people need to take sides, and people don't understand the algorithmic nature of social media, and they don't understand that this is only feeding into the same kind of polarization that isn't helping, right? We need to bring people together. We need to talk to each other about our differences, and of course, especially with regards to the war, there is so much pain, and that is only getting worse, right? And so much trauma, and it's only going to be more difficult to have a calm conversation where we listen to each other and understand where everyone is coming from, and then you can get to, okay, well, what facts are we talking about? What is the evidence for the facts, and can we question that evidence? Are we allowing each other to question maybe very long held beliefs? That's hard. That's hard under normal circumstances, but we're talking about a war. We're talking about many young people being murdered. Like, when one young person is murdered, our communities usually mourn. Now we're talking about hundreds and thousands of young people being murdered. That's almost too hard to bear, So how can we possibly have respectful disagreement in a situation like that? It is incredibly difficult, and I don't think college campuses are prepared for that. I think we're going to have to do a lot of work in the coming weeks and months. But at the beginning, you could see there was mostly either paralysis by many people who felt like they were so afraid of offending anyone, they'd rather not say anything. And then the people on both sides who felt very strongly that they should say one thing or another, being very loud, right? And there's a lot of silence in the middle. And I think we need to change that. And there needs to be much more conversation, but that needs to be facilitated by people who really understand conflict. And fortunately at Brandeis, we have like a program on conflict and coexistence. So there are experts, but I don't think many colleges have that. And so it's a challenge. I do
One
agree.
of-
It's
one
a
of the
challenge. And
questions-
you asked, what can you all do? I think we all need to question ourselves. You know, that's what I tell my students. You are justified to have strong feelings. This is a horrible situation, and you should have strong feelings. You would be dead if you didn't have strong feelings at this moment. But as a student, you need to question as well. You need to question your assumptions. You need to question your beliefs. You need to question, you need to ask, you need to dig in deeper. You need to search for the truth. At Brandeis, our motto is truth even unto its innermost parts. And we all need to promote that, I think. Sorry.
So one of the questions in the chat box is, why do you think, particularly at Brandeis, anti-Semitism is particularly high? Why do you think that is at Brandeis? You
Oh,
just
no,
told me
that's
that
not-
there was a, that you have this particular program, but
No, I didn't mean to say Brandeis has a particular problem with anti-Semitism.
that's the question in the question box. The person asking the question says, why is anti-Semitism so strong at Brandeis?
It isn't. It isn't. No. I that's a misunderstanding. Anti-Semitism is not stronger at Brandeis. I would say anti-Semitism is much weaker at Brandeis than in other places. And of course, what this comes down to is also, what do we mean by anti-Semitism, right? There are definitions of anti-Semitism, and as you probably well know, we have scholars who have written 3 definitions of anti-Semitism, and they are arguing over them because they disagree, and the disagreement is mostly related to anti-Israel and anti-Zionist anti-Semitism. So it's very complicated, right?
What is the difference? I wrote that. I know my kids, and I know hundreds of their friends who stopped giving money to Brandeis because you're saying anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, anti-Jewishness, and so on is not anti-Semitism. I'm sorry, I cannot believe that.
No, I think that's not what I said. What I was saying was, we have the IRA, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance has produced a definition of anti-Semitism. And there's also the Jerusalem Declaration, and there's the Nexus definition. And each of these definitions look at the anti-Zionism and critique of Israel differently, and they look at it differently, and they define anti-Semitism differently. That's what I was saying. There was a total misinformation about Brandeis that was spread in the news, that Brandeis students were not willing to reject Hamas as anti-Semitic. That was complete fabrication. That was not the point. The problem at the time was that there was a resolution brought to the student union, and the student union was asked to vote on it, but they hadn't actually seen it. And the student union needed to see it and read it to vote on it, and they were not given the time to read it and vote on it. And so they said, we cannot vote on this now, we need to read it first. And the person who wanted the student union to vote on it went to the press and said they are reject Hamas, which was not at all true, and that was a misrepresentation of the facts.
You're saying there's no anti-Semitism at Brandeis.
We please not.
I'm not
have,
saying that. No, I'm sure there are people who would define something that someone at Brandeis says as anti-Semitic. I don't know what every person at Brandeis thinks in their hearts. I cannot, but I just want to correct the information that was spread. And this was a typical example, someone pushed it out, and then it got, I got an email from a friend who saw it in an article and said, what? Brandeis students don't condemn Hamas? And I'm like, what? I had to do some and I only found out actually a few days ago what the real story was, and that was never made clear in public. So this is how misinformation spreads. And because we are in these echo chambers, and because people are believing easily what they're seeing because it's in writing, you know, we need to ask questions always. We need to question what we're seeing. And that's, I think, especially on a college campus.
There were a couple of questions that asked about the power of Iran and Russia on social media platforms in promoting the extermination of Jews and promoting the Hamas narrative. And that's a concern of some people in the audience here. Could you address that?
Yes, I mean, I'm obviously not an expert on that, but I can tell you one of the most disturbing understandings I've got from the reading and from my own you know, learning on this is that the content moderation that we experience in the United States is the best. It's bad, but it is the best compared to other parts of the world. In other words, the companies put far less money into moderating hate in other countries in the world. And so that's why the Rohingya genocide in Myanmar was officially by the UN shown to have been basically promoted by Facebook, right? Because there was no emphasis and no resources spent on preventing misinformation from being shared. The same is true in Ethiopia. I think there were several other cases in other countries where content was completely left unmoderated and able to completely, you know, foster hate that then led to offline violence. And yes, state-sponsored terrorism is certainly very much alive and well on social media platforms.
Right.
I mean, we knew about Russian influences in the elections, so this should not come as a surprise.
Right. Okay. There are a bunch of questions, but we're running short of time. But I'll see what we can do to have a one or two more. Let's see.
Can I just interrupt for 1 second and ask,
Sure.
based on what you just said, it seems like the bad actors can harness the algorithms much more easily and more effectively than the people trying to promote good ideas or the truth.
Yes.
That sounds very pessimistic.
Yes. Yes. The companies, as Frances Haugen said, they could change the algorithm, but they would lose a lot of money. And yeah, and I think and most people don't understand that. And what's even worse is nowadays these algorithms are run by AI. They're not even run by people anymore. You know, TikTok, which is the fastest growing and most used, and people actually tell me that young people use TikTok like we use Google. TikTok is practically the most sophisticated AI, and the algorithms are run by AI. So it is out of the hands of people in many cases.
This brings a question that I had that I wrote down. I'm not sure I understand. You spoke a lot about the connection of the algorithms that are all focused on money and companies and that they're looking at people and how they how they can get more people to click on the ads and buy more of those properties. I'm not sure. I don't really understand the connection between that. You said, well, it's only algorithms, and that's what's fueling the anti-Semitism. That depending on how people are picked up and what they do and how they say, that the algorithms are promoting, different, things to buy. What's that got to do with the discussion, about Hamas and Palestine and Israel and what they're doing? I'm not sure what that's got to do with that. Okay, and then you said something also. You say that you tell the kids, don't engage with negative speech. Don't say I disagree. Don't say why is that a bad thing? And
Yeah, so these are,
why is that a bad thing? Go ahead.
I'm glad you're asking, because these two are connected. So when something is run by algorithms, the algorithms actually don't care about the content. The algorithm is just a computer code, and that sees you engaging. Whether you engage negatively or positively, it doesn't care. It sees that you're engaging, and it generates, it says, oh, here's engagement. Let's have more of this. So the more you engage, the more attention the algorithm gives you. The more time you spend on the social media platform, the more you get sort of rewarded for that, so that your posts get more attention from the algorithm. So in other words, it promotes hate, because what they have found initially when they wrote this code is that negative information seems to get people more engaged. And so it's not specifically anti-Semitic, it's not specifically racist, it's not specifically sexist, it's just that it's negative. And the negativity seems to get people worked up. So if you're seeing a hateful comment and you get upset about it, and so you write underneath, this is really hateful, this is awful, the only thing the computer sees is, ooh, someone is giving this attention. I need to push it up in the ranking, sort of. And then more people see it. So it isn't about anti-Semitism specifically, but it is about the negative content.
Okay.
I seem to recall reading a research report from MIT that said something to the effect that hateful, exciting, sensational speech is 7 times more likely to be processed and forwarded than something that is the opposite.
Yes, exactly. That's what we're talking about. And it doesn't really matter hate against whom, so if you looked at the broader picture, then I think the most hateful stuff is actually about women. It's not anti-Semitic, but anti-Semitism is certainly a big problem, and much bigger than the number of Jews would suggest.
Why is that? There was a statement by an FBI director recently that Jews make up 2.5% of the population of the United States, yet they take up 60% of the hate crimes.
Yes.
Why is it so disproportionate?
I think it has a lot to do with the fact that there's a readily available arsenal of ammunition against Jews from a long history. So in this case, you could argue that Jews are suffering from their success, because Jews have been around for a long time. And during that long time, they've also accumulated a huge amount of anti-Semitic history. And that anti-Semitic history has been, sort of ingrained in the culture. I mean, I certainly can see that in Germany, right? Anti-Semitic speech, anti-Semitic symbols, anti-Semitic thinking is so ingrained in the culture that people may not even be aware that something they say is anti-Semitic. And that's why it is readily available and then easily reused in such an environment as social media. But also, unfortunately, leading to offline hate and violence. I'm sorry, this is also depressing, but I mean, we are living in incredibly depressing times. And so my message to you all is really be extremely cognizant of the danger that social media pose, because it isn't making us better people. It is making us more hateful, and we need to instead seek out dialogue. We need to speak with each other. We need to talk across our differences, especially within the Jewish community. I know that there are people who are strongly, like I know in the Grand Central Station protest, there were many Jewish advocates for a ceasefire. And in my class, we talk about this, and there are very different opinions about what is the right way forward. But I'm hoping that we keep talking to each other. We should not allow social media to make it worse. We need to keep talking to each other, because ultimately we're living on this one little planet together, and we need to do so in peace. So
I found your talk chilling, but on the other hand, there is optimism, because as far as I'm aware, the only way to solve a problem is to understand it.
thank you.
And without understanding, you can't come up with effective solutions.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I'm certainly not the biggest expert on how to figure this out technology wise, but I'm hoping to help promote resources being spent on that, and getting more people knowledgeable enough so that they can demand change. And that's my little contribution, I guess.
Okay, Sabine, someone has asked, where can we get the books that you spoke about? Do you have a list or?
I can certainly email you what I spoke about, so you can have. I mean, they're all available in the bookstores and online, but I can email you the whole list.
If you could share the list of that.
Yeah, that's no problem. Then you can forward them.
Be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And and let me just make sure there are any particular questions that just need to that stand out. Give me a second.
While you're looking,
go ahead.
do you think that there's a chance? I think a big part of the problem comes from the fact that Congress passed a bill a number of years ago that exempts social media from content truth confirmation.
Yes.
And without that bill being revoked or adjusted or changed, is there any chance for social media to change the algorithm? I mean, there's no incentive for them to do it, and every incentive to keep it.
Yes, and they are, of course, using the argument that this is about free speech, right, and freedom, and that this is also their private data, and the government has no authority over their private data. They are, after all, private companies. So they're speaking out of two sides of their mouths, right? On the one hand, they want to not be a media company, and on the other hand, they want the free speech and the ability to basically function like a media company. But there are now several lawsuits pending against social media companies, I think, for making young people addicted. And so I think that's also a process, an ongoing a process that will hopefully move things. But again, like you said, I loved how you said it, George. Knowledge is the first step, and more people need to become knowledgeable about this so that they can also then speak intelligently to their elected officials and explain to them why they want change. You know, Europe has done some work on this. It's easier in Europe to curtail the power of big corporations because money has a little bit less influence in politics there than it does here. But this is a global phenomenon, and you know, anti-Semitism doesn't stop at borders, and unfortunately, social media companies operate across borders, and so it's something that needs to be
true. They can be treated like newspapers if they're viewed as a journalistic endeavor. This would not be a problem, and that's something that's been suggested. But of course, they don't like it. But Congress could enact it, and let's hope that they will eventually, because that is one of the solutions to this.
You're right, and you know they did that in Canada, and you know what the social media companies did? They simply shut down all the news outlets. So you can, if you're in Canada now, you cannot share news on Facebook.
Good.
Because like if I see something in the New York Times, I cannot share it on Facebook because Facebook is fighting with the Canadian government. And so they're saying, well, if you want to treat us badly, then we'll just not allow news organizations to share anything on our platform anymore. And so they're basically trying to hold the government hostage, to pressure the government into not enforcing these regulations. And so far, the Canadian government hasn't come to any kind of, compromise.
But there are liabilities that newspapers have if they have fake news in them. There are liabilities. If these companies become liable, they'll be much more careful about what comes on.
Yes, and that's why they're fighting against it.
Right.
Yes, but if they fought the same thing in the United States, with the amount of people that go on social media, they would lose all that advertising money, and I don't think that they would stand for it as they do in Canada. I think they would have a much better fight regulating them here in the United States.
Good point.
Because money talks.
It does.
Sabine, thank you very much for a very exciting, very interesting, and very educational talk.
Thank you so much for having me.
I think we'd like to call on Rabbi Yafi for the closing remarks for our presentations.
Thank you, George. As we conclude this program, which has given us the opportunity to mark the 85th anniversary of Kristallnacht, a dark day in the Jewish history, I'd like to share with you these final words of an article entitled Kristallnacht's Timeless Lesson, written by Rabbi Beryl Wine. He writes, the fires of Kristallnacht must be converted to the fire of Judaism and Jewish life within the souls of the Jewish people. Fire destroys and fire warms. Fire can be constructive or destructive. Those choices remain with us. Embracing the memory of Kristallnacht and its events can help us to focus our intention on the choices that we make. By taking this hour to learn about the algorithms that are fueling the current rise in anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic acts against Jews all over the world, it's my hope that a fire has been ignited within each and every one of us to do what we can to enlighten our world with the fire of our pride and joy in being Jewish. Tomorrow, each of us has an opportunity to do this together with our fellow Jews At 5:30 in the afternoon on Central Park West between 83rd and 85th Streets in Manhattan, there'll be a large gathering of our fellow Jews for a powerful vigil and rally that has been organized by the UJA to mark the conclusion of Shloshim, the 30-day period of mourning for those who were brutally killed by Hamas on October 7th. We'll hear from elected officials, community leaders, and others who stand together with us. I'll be on that train from Little Neck at 3:20. And anyone who is here and anyone you know, if you want to invite them, join me on that train. And I invite you to experience this important opportunity to be part of shining the light from the fire of our Jewish pride. I pray that taking the time to embrace the difficult memory of Kristallnacht, as we have done this morning, and to take a look at how social media is fueling the hatred within our world, amongst our young people and amongst everyone. We hope that the light of the fire of a greater Jewish future for us and for future generations can come from our learning and from doing everything we can to stand tall and proud. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank all those who served on our Community Kristallnacht Committee to bring members of each of our hosting synagogues, Congregation Lador Vador, Oakland Little Neck Jewish Center, Congregation Eitz Chaim at Hollis Hills Bayside, and Temple Torah, together today for this important program. I'd also like to thank our speaker today, Sabine von Mering, for sharing her wisdom and teaching us about the algorithms and a whole bunch of other things that are fueling the dangerous fire of anti-Semitism and hatred in our day. Let us conclude this program with the prayer, Oseh Shalom B'Romav, Hu Ya'aseh Shalom Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael V'Imru. Amen. May God, who makes peace in the heavens, make peace for us, the entire Jewish people, and let us all say together, Amen.